The night she arrived, the wind was sharp enough to cut through wool, and the moon hid behind a cover of fast-moving clouds. The rancher heard the knock just as he finished bolting the barn doors. A slow, uncertain sound that did not belong out there after dark. He stood still for a moment, listening. Out on the plains, nothing knocked unless it wanted something or someone. He wiped his hands on his coat and walked toward the house, every step measured, every sense awake. When he opened the door, he saw a woman standing on the porch, thin as a fence rail and wrapped in a coat that had seen better days. Her hair was loose, tangled by travel and weather, and her eyes held the kind of fear that did not fade quickly. She looked like someone who had walked a long way without knowing where she would stop. She did not speak at first. She just stood there, breathing hard, as if the simple act of staying upright took all her strength. The rancher did not ask her name. He did not ask where she came from or why she was there. He had learned long ago that questions could feel like traps to someone already running. He stepped aside and let her in, closing the door behind her and shutting the cold out with it. He pointed to the chair near the stove and set a kettle on the fire. The woman sat without protest, her hands shaking as she held them close to the warmth. The ranch had been quiet for a long time, too quiet, some said. The rancher lived alone now, his days filled with cattle, fences, and the steady rhythm of work that kept memories at bay. Folks in town knew him as a man who kept to himself, who paid fair and spoke little. They did not know much else, and he preferred it that way. The woman watched him as he moved about the room, her eyes following every motion. She seemed unsure whether to trust the silence or fear it. When he handed her a cup of hot water, she took it with both hands, nodding once in thanks. Her fingers were rough, scarred in places, telling a story of hard days and harder choices. She stayed the night, then the next. The rancher set up the small spare room without comment. He noticed how she startled at sudden sounds, how she woke before dawn and sat by the window until the light came. She offered to help around the house, sweeping floors, washing dishes, tending to small tasks with quiet care. He accepted without praise or suspicion. Word did not travel far out there, but it always traveled eventually. A few riders passed the ranch and noticed an extra horse tied near the fence. Someone in town mentioned seeing a woman buying bread and supplies with careful eyes and a guarded posture. Questions were asked, but none reached the rancher directly. He had a way of discouraging curiosity without raising his voice. At night, when the wind settled and the animals grew still, the woman sometimes sat across from him at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug, her gaze fixed on the wood grain as if it held answers. She spoke little. When she did, it was about small things, like the way the land stretched out beyond the hills, or how the stars looked different out there. She never spoke of her past. He never asked. The rancher told himself he was doing what any decent man would do. Still, he felt something shift in the quiet routines he had built around himself. The ranch no longer felt like a place frozen in time. There was movement again, uncertainty, and with it came a low hum of unease he could not name. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence line, he noticed her standing at a distance, watching the cattle move across the field. She seemed drawn to the animals, especially the younger ones, speaking softly to them when she thought no one was listening. He wondered what life she had lived to find comfort there. As days turned into weeks, the woman began to look less like a shadow passing through, and more like someone who might stay. She gained a little weight. The fear in her eyes dulled, though it never vanished. Sometimes when she laughed at something small, the sound startled them both. The rancher found himself listening for her steps in the morning, noting when she moved through the house. It bothered him more than he liked. Attachment was a dangerous thing. He had buried too much of it already. The change came quietly, the way storms often do on the plains. It was late evening, the sky bruised with color as the sun slipped away. The rancher sat cleaning his boots by the door while the woman prepared a simple meal. The room smelled of bread and stew, a rare comfort he had almost forgotten. She set the bowls on the table, then hesitated. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the chair across from him. She sat, but did not reach for her food. Instead, she stared at the surface of the table, her breath shallow. He noticed right away. He always noticed when something was wrong. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. The rancher waited, the silence stretching between them, heavy and watchful. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. She said there was something she needed to tell him. Something she should have said the first night. Her eyes lifted to his for a brief moment, and in that glance he saw fear return full force, sharper than before. He nodded once, giving her permission without words. Her lips moved again, and this time she said a name. The sound of it hit the room like a gunshot, though it was spoken so softly. The rancher felt the blood drain from his face. The name was one he had not heard in years, not spoken aloud since the day he thought it buried for good. It belonged to a past he had locked away, to a wound that had never truly healed. He stood so suddenly that his chair scraped loudly across the floor. The woman flinched, shrinking back as if expecting anger or worse. The rancher's heart pounded in his ears. His hands clenched into fists before he could stop them. He asked her where she had heard that name, his voice low and tight. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes, saying only that she knew it and that she had hoped she was wrong. She said she had not planned for it to come out like this. She said she was sorry. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Outside, a coyote howled, the sound long and lonely. The rancher stared at the woman across the table, seeing her now through a different lens. Questions he had buried clawed their way back to the surface. Who was she really? Why had she come here of all places? And how did she know a name that was never meant to be spoken again? The woman lowered her head, her shoulders shaking. She whispered that she could leave if he wanted, that she had nowhere else to go but would not stay where she was not welcome. The rancher did not answer. He could not. The fire crackled in the stove, loud in the silence. The rancher felt the weight of the past press down on him, heavy and unrelenting. He had opened his door without questions, believing some things were better left unknown. Now, standing there with that name hanging in the air between them, he realized the truth had a way of finding its way home. And he did not yet know whether it had come to destroy what little peace he had left or to demand something he had avoided for far too long. The rancher remained standing long after the woman's whisper faded into the quiet. The name still hung between them, heavy as smoke that would not clear. He turned toward the window, staring out at the dark stretch of land, as if the answer might be written somewhere beyond the fence line. The woman did not move. She sat with her hands folded tight in her lap, shoulders hunched, waiting for whatever judgment might come. At last he spoke, not looking at her. He said it had been a long time since anyone used that name in his presence. He said it belonged to a chapter he believed closed. His voice was steady, but his jaw was set in a way that betrayed him. The woman nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, though she made no sound. She told him she never meant to deceive him. When she first knocked on his door, she had not known for certain it was his ranch. She had only known the land, the shape of the hills, the way the road bent near the creek. Those details had been etched into her memory from stories told long ago. When she realized where she was, fear had taken hold, but desperation had kept her from leaving. The rancher turned then, slowly, and studied her face, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. He noticed the way her eyes searched his, not with challenge, but with a plea for understanding. He asked her how she knew that name. She hesitated, then said it was tied to her own past, to something she had been running from for longer than she cared to admit. That night ended without answers. He told her to rest and said they would speak again in the morning. The words sounded calm, but inside his thoughts churned. Sleep came only in short bursts, each filled with fragments of memory, faces he had not seen in years, voices carried on wind, promises made and broken. The woman lay awake too, staring at the ceiling of the small room, listening to the creaks of the old house. She wondered if she had ruined the only safe place she had found. The name had slipped out in a moment of weakness, driven by fear that the truth would surface anyway. Now she had no choice but to face whatever followed. Morning brought no relief. The rancher rose early and went out to tend the animals, working harder than usual as if effort could drive the past back into the ground. The woman watched from the window, unsure whether to follow or give him space. Eventually, she joined him outside, keeping a careful distance. They worked side by side without speaking, repairing a gate and checking the cattle. The silence felt different now, sharper, filled with unspoken questions. Every glance carried weight. Every pause felt loaded. As the sun climbed, the rancher finally spoke again. He said the name she had spoken belonged to someone he once trusted, someone who had vanished after leaving ruin behind. Did not explain further. He did not need to. The bitterness in his voice said enough. The woman listened closely. When he finished, she told him she had heard stories of that person too. Stories that painted a different picture, one of charm and promise, of plans that never came to pass. She said her own life had been shaped by those same broken promises. She did not accuse. She simply stated it as fact. The rancher stopped what he was doing and looked at her. Really looked. He asked her then who she was to that name. The woman swallowed hard. She said the connection was not simple. She said blood alone did not define it, but it could not be ignored either. The words landed heavy, opening more questions than they answered. Over the following days, pieces of the past began to surface in small, careful conversations. The woman spoke of a childhood marked by moving from place to place, always chasing a man who was never there. She spoke of a mother who held on to hope long after it should have died. She spoke of learning early not to trust what sounded too good to be true. The rancher listened, his expression guarded. He shared little in return, but the silence between them shifted. It was no longer empty. It was crowded with shared loss and unanswered questions. Rumors began to drift in from town. Someone mentioned seeing a stranger asking about the ranch. Another said a man had been asking after a woman matching her description. The woman grew tense, watching the road more often, flinching at distant sounds. The rancher noticed and said nothing, but he began locking the doors at night. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the woman admitted she was afraid the past had followed her there. She said she had spent years trying to outrun it, only to find it waiting where she least expected. The rancher told her running never truly worked. He knew that better than most. Despite the tension, a strange bond formed between them. They understood each other in ways that did not require explanation. Both had built walls to survive. Both knew the cost of letting them down. The rancher struggled with his own conflict. Part of him wanted answers, full and clear, no matter the pain. Another part feared what those answers might demand of him. Responsibility had a way of finding him, whether he sought it or not. The woman, for her part, felt torn between gratitude and guilt. She had found shelter, kindness without conditions, and yet her presence threatened to disturb the fragile balance of the rancher's life. She considered leaving more than once, packing her things quietly before dawn. Each time, something held her back. One afternoon, a rider appeared at the edge of the property, watching the ranch from a distance. The rancher noticed immediately, stood still, hand resting on the fence, eyes narrowed. The woman saw him too and felt a chill run through her. She said nothing, but her fear was clear. The rider did not approach. He turned and disappeared down the road, leaving behind questions and unease. The rancher told the woman to stay close to the house from then on. His tone left no room for argument. That night, she finally told him the full truth of why she had come west. Why she had been searching for this place without fully understanding why. She said the name she spoke was tied to unfinished business, to a secret that could not remain buried forever. She said she believed the rancher held a piece of the answer whether he knew it or not. The rancher felt the weight of those words settle deep in his chest. He realized then that taking her in without questions had never truly been an act of chance. Some part of him had known this reckoning would come. He had simply hoped it would not. As the fire burned low, the woman's voice softened. She said she did not want anything from him except the truth. Whatever it was, however painful, she said she was tired of shadows and half-stories. The rancher stared into the flames, seeing faces and places long gone. He knew the truth she sought would change both of them. He also knew avoiding it had already cost too much. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of distant movement across the plains. The rancher stood and looked out into the dark, feeling the past closing in. The woman watched him waiting, her fate tied to his next choice. Neither of them knew that the answers they feared were closer than they realized. Moving steadily toward the ranch, ready to force the truth into the open whether they were prepared or not. The days that followed settled into a strained rhythm, one that felt familiar yet unsettled. The rancher went about his work as he always had, mending fences, checking cattle, hauling feed, but his thoughts were no longer anchored in the present. Every creak of leather, every distant hoofbeat carried a question. The woman sensed it too. She moved more carefully now, as if afraid to disturb something fragile that neither of them could name. She began spending more time in the barn, finding comfort among the animals. The horses accepted her easily, their calm presence easing the tension she carried in her shoulders. She brushed them slowly, speaking in low tones, as if sharing pieces of herself she could not yet offer the rancher. Watching her from a distance, he noticed how natural she looked there, how the animals leaned into her touch. It stirred something in him, a memory of a life that once felt full. At night, sleep continued to come in fragments. The rancher found himself walking the property after dark, lantern in hand, scanning the edges of the land. He told himself it was caution, nothing more. But deep down he knew he was waiting for something, or someone. The woman often watched from the window until he returned, relief softening her face when she saw him step back into the light. In town, talk began to shift. People noticed the rancher buying more supplies than usual. Few mentioned the woman, her quiet presence, her guarded eyes. Some remembered the old stories tied to that name she had spoken, though no one said them out loud. Old memories had a way of surfacing when stirred, even if they had been buried under years of silence. The woman ventured into town less often now. When she did, she kept her head down, finishing her business quickly, sensed eyes on her, curiosity mixed with recognition she could not place. More than once, she felt sure someone was following her, only to turn and find the street empty. One afternoon, the rancher returned from checking a distant pasture to find a note pinned to the fence near the road. It held no name, only a few words asking questions that cut too close to the truth. He crumpled the paper in his fist, anger flaring hot and sharp. Someone was digging. Someone was not content to let the past remain where it belonged. He did not show the note to the woman, not yet. Instead, he asked her more about her journey, about the places she had stopped along the way. She answered honestly, describing work taken where she could find it, nights spent in borrowed shelters, the constant fear of being recognized. With each story, the rancher's sense of responsibility grew heavier. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, circling the truth without fully touching it. The woman spoke of her mother often now, of lessons learned through hardship, of warnings given too late. She said her mother had always believed the rancher was different, that if anyone could set things right, it would be him. Hearing that unsettled him more than accusation ever could. He told her fragments of his own past in return, not the full story, but enough to reveal regret and loss. He spoke of choices made in youth, of trusting the wrong people, of consequences that rippled outward in ways he never intended. The woman listened closely, seeing in his words the missing pieces of her own story. A new subplot began to take shape in the form of the land itself. A boundary dispute resurfaced with a neighboring ranch, one that traced back to the same time period as the name they both avoided saying. Papers were missing, records were unclear. The rancher suspected this was no coincidence. The past was not only knocking, it was pressing in from all sides. The woman noticed his frustration and offered to help sort through old documents stored in the attic. Together, they climbed into the dusty space, boxes stacked high with the weight of years. As they worked, they uncovered letters, faded photographs, and receipts that told a story neither of them fully understood yet. Each discovery tightened the knot between them. One photograph in particular caught the woman's breath. It showed the rancher standing beside a younger man, arms slung over each other's shoulders, both smiling with an ease that felt foreign now. The woman recognized the face immediately. Her hands trembled as she held the picture. The rancher noticed and gently took it from her, his expression closing off. He said nothing, but the silence spoke volumes. The trust between them strained, pulled thin by what remained unsaid. Outside, the presence of strangers became harder to ignore. Riders passed more frequently. A wagon lingered once near the road longer than necessary. The rancher tightened security, repairing locks, keeping a watchful eye. The woman felt guilt gnaw at her. She feared she had brought danger to his door, along with her questions. At the same time, a different tension grew between them, quieter but no less powerful. Shared glances lingered. Conversations softened at the edges. In moments of exhaustion, they found comfort sitting near each other, saying nothing at all. It complicated everything. Caring made the stakes higher. One evening, a storm rolled in fast and fierce, driving them both into the house early. As thunder shook the walls, The woman admitted she feared the truth might cost her the only place she felt safe. She said she understood if he chose to send her away. The rancher surprised them both by saying he did not want her to leave. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning he was not yet ready to face. The storm passed, leaving the air sharp and clear. In its wake came a messenger from town, bringing word that someone had been asking detailed questions about the rancher's past. Names were being spoken again, quietly, but insistently. The rancher felt the walls closing in. That night, he finally showed the woman the note. She read it slowly, recognition flashing across her face. She admitted she had seen similar messages before, always appearing when she got too close to answers. Whoever was behind them did not want the past uncovered, yet seemed unable to stop circling it. Another subplot unfolded through the ranch hands who worked nearby. One older hand hinted that he remembered more than he had ever said, that the past held debts unpaid. His words added another layer of mystery, suggesting the truth was larger than either of them suspected. As days shortened, the tension became almost unbearable. The woman felt pulled between confronting the truth and preserving the fragile peace they had built. The rancher wrestled with the weight of responsibility, knowing that protecting her might mean exposing himself to consequences long avoided. They stood one evening at the edge of the property, watching the sun sink low. The land stretched wide and quiet, holding secrets beneath its soil. The woman said softly that she believed the land remembered everything, even when people tried to forget. The rancher did not disagree. In the distance, a rider approached at an unhurried pace, too confident to be a passerby. The rancher stiffened, instinct flaring. The woman followed his gaze, dread settling deep in her chest. Whoever was coming carried answers, or danger, or both. Neither spoke as the figure drew closer, the sound of hooves, steady and inevitable. The past they had circled for so long was finally stepping into view, and both knew there would be no turning back once it arrived. The rider slowed as he neared the fence. His posture relaxed in a way that felt deliberate. He did not wave, did not call out, simply stopped and sat there, studying the ranch, as if it belonged to him already. The rancher stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of the woman without thinking. She noticed the gesture and felt a mix of gratitude and fear tighten her chest. When the rider finally spoke, his voice carried easily across the open land. He said the ranch looked well kept, said it had been a long time since he had seen it in person. The words were harmless on the surface, but the way he said them suggested ownership that did not belong to him. The rancher answered carefully, keeping his tone flat, asking what business brought him there. The rider smiled faintly and said business was a complicated thing. He said he was following up on old matters that never quite settled. His eyes drifted to the woman, lingering just long enough to make her stomach drop. She looked away, fighting the urge to run. The rancher felt anger rise, slow and controlled. He told the rider this was private land and asked him to state his purpose plainly. The rider chuckled and said plain answers were rarely useful when history was involved. He mentioned names from the past, not the one the woman had whispered, but others tied to it. Each one felt like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through the rancher's carefully guarded calm. After a moment, the rider tipped his hat and said he would return another day. He turned his horse and rode off, leaving behind dust and unease. The woman exhaled shakily, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. That night, neither of them slept. The rancher paced the house, replaying the encounter over and over. The woman sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup she did not drink from, staring at the door as if expecting it to open again at any moment. The presence of an outside threat sharpened everything between them. In the days that followed, signs of pressure mounted. Another note appeared, this one more direct, warning that truths buried too deep had a way of collapsing the ground above them. The rancher burned it without a word, the flames reflecting in his eyes. The woman began to have dreams that left her shaken. Faces she half remembered. Voices calling her name in places she could not see. She started keeping a small bundle packed, just in case. The rancher noticed and said nothing, though the sight of it unsettled him deeply. A separate tension brewed in town. Old disputes were resurfacing, records questioned. People who had stayed silent for years began to speak in fragments, hinting at deals made and broken. The rancher felt the net tightening, threads pulling from all sides. One evening, An older neighbor came by under the excuse of borrowing tools, spoke in careful phrases, suggesting the past had not been as simple as the rancher remembered it. He hinted that the rancher had been left holding responsibility that was never meant to be his alone. The conversation ended without clarity, but the damage was done. Doubt crept in where certainty once stood. The woman, sensing the strain, tried to pull away emotionally, believing distance might protect them both. She spoke less, kept to herself more. The rancher noticed the change and felt a sharp sense of loss he was not prepared to face. He wanted to ask her to stay, to promise safety, but promises felt dangerous now. As the season shifted, storms became more frequent. The land itself seemed restless, winds rising without warning, skies darkening quickly. During one such storm, a section of fence collapsed, cattle scattering. The rancher and the woman worked side by side in the rain, shouting over the wind, pulling together with a shared urgency that cut through fear. In that moment, the connection between them felt undeniable. Afterward, soaked and exhausted, they stood close under the barn roof, breath coming fast. For a brief second, it seemed the weight of everything else might fall away. Then reality returned, heavy and unyielding. The woman stepped back first, the distance between them sharper than before. Another rider appeared days later, this time stopping closer, his manner less polite. He spoke openly about claims on land, about documents that could surface, about people who wanted answers. The rancher responded firmly, but the threat was clear. The past was no longer content to circle. It was pressing for resolution. The woman overheard part of the exchange and felt panic rise. She confronted the rancher afterward, demanding to know how far this went, how much danger she had brought into his life. He tried to reassure her, but his words rang hollow, could no longer protect her with silence. Late one night, she finally told him the one thing she had been holding back. She admitted the name she whispered was not just a connection of blood or memory, but the key to something that could unravel everything. She said she believed the rancher had been lied to long ago, that he had taken the burden meant for another. She said the truth might clear his name or destroy what he had built. The rancher listened, his face unreadable. He felt a strange mix of dread and relief. The idea that he might not be the villain of his own story offered comfort, but the cost of proving it felt immense. From that moment on, their alliance solidified. Whatever came, they would face it together. Neither dared speak of what that might mean once the truth surfaced. The land dispute escalated quickly. A formal notice arrived, demanding proof of ownership tied to events from years past. The rancher knew the papers existed somewhere, buried among the attic boxes, or lost to time. Finding them became urgent. They searched day and night, exhaustion setting in. Each discovery raised more questions. A ledger with missing pages, a letter never sent, a signature that looked forged. The puzzle grew more complex, the stakes higher. Meanwhile, the woman's presence in town drew more attention. Someone recognized her. Whispers followed. She began to understand that her identity carried weight far beyond her own life. She was not just seeking answers for herself, but for others who had been wronged or forgotten. The rancher received word that a meeting had been called, one that would force the issue into the open. People from the past would be there. Stories would clash. Secrets would surface. There would be no avoiding it. The night before the meeting, the ranch was wrapped in an uneasy calm. The woman stood outside, looking out over the land she had come to care for deeply. The rancher joined her, saying nothing. The silence between them was full, heavy with everything unsaid. She asked him quietly what he feared most. He answered honestly. He feared losing what little peace he had found. He feared learning that some wounds could never be healed. She nodded, understanding all too well. In the distance, lights flickered along the road, riders moving through the dark. The future pressed close, unavoidable now. The woman whispered that whatever happened next would change them both. The rancher agreed. As dawn approached, the tension reached a breaking point. The truth waited just beyond the horizon, sharp and unforgiving. Neither knew if it would bring justice or ruin. They stood together, watching the sky lighten, knowing the next step would lead them straight into the heart of everything they had been avoiding. Morning arrived without warmth. The sky stayed pale and distant, as if the sun itself was hesitant to rise fully. The rancher saddled his horse in silence, the leather creaking under his hands. The woman stood nearby, watching each movement as if committing it to memory. Neither spoke, but both knew the day ahead would decide more than land or stories. It would decide who they were once the past stopped hiding. The road to town felt longer than usual. Dust rose with every step, clinging to boots and hems, marking the slow approach to something unavoidable. Along the way, they passed neighbors who offered nods that carried more weight than words. Some faces held sympathy. Others held judgment. The woman felt exposed under those looks, as if her very presence stirred memories people wished had stayed buried. As they reached the edge of town, the sound of voices grew louder. A small crowd had already gathered near the old meeting hall, drawn by rumor and unfinished business. Horses were tied along the fence, wagons lined up unevenly, their drivers standing in tight groups. The air felt thick, charged with expectation and unease. The rancher dismounted first, offering a steadying hand as the woman followed. She took it without hesitation, grounding herself in the simple human contact. For a moment, that small gesture eased the fear pressing against her chest. Then she looked up and saw him. The rider from the ranch stood near the entrance, hat low, eyes sharp. Beside him were two others, older men whose faces carried the marks of years and secrets. One of them turned slowly, recognition flashing in his eyes when he saw the woman. His expression hardened. Inside, the hall smelled of old wood and dust. Benches creaked as people settled in. The rancher and the woman took seats near the back, though it felt as if every eye found its way to them regardless. Murmurs rippled through the room, fragments of names and half-truths spoken under breath. The meeting began with formal words about land records and disputes, but it did not take long for the conversation to shift. Someone mentioned the ranch by name. Another spoke of deals made years ago under unclear terms. The rancher listened, jaw tight, recognizing pieces of his own history woven into the accusations. Then the rider stood. He spoke calmly, confidently, as if he had rehearsed every word. He claimed the ranch had been built on a lie, that rightful ownership had been ignored due to influence and silence. He hinted at documents that had vanished and witnesses who had been paid to forget. The woman felt her pulse race. She realized then that this was not just about property. It was about blame, about shifting responsibility away from those who had caused harm and onto those who had survived it. The rancher stood to answer, his voice steady but edged with strain. He spoke of working the land honestly, of paying debts that were not his to begin with. He admitted mistakes, but denied deceit. As he spoke, the room grew quieter, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. A voice from the front interrupted. An older man rose slowly, leaning on a cane. He said he remembered those days clearly. He remembered promises made and broken. He looked directly at the woman then, his gaze sharp and assessing. I asked her who she was and why she had come. The room held its breath. The rancher felt her hand tremble in his. He squeezed it gently, a silent offer of support. The woman stood, legs unsteady, but resolve firm. She spoke simply, saying she had come seeking truth, not revenge. She said the past had shaped her life, whether she wanted it to or not. She did not speak the name aloud, but everyone knew which one she meant. A ripple of reaction moved through the room. Some looked away. Others leaned forward, hungry for answers. The rider laughed softly, accusing her of stirring trouble for her own gain. He suggested she was being used or worse, manipulating sympathy. The words cut deep, but she held her ground, meeting his gaze without flinching. The tension climbed with each exchange. Accusations flew. Old alliances cracked. Someone demanded proof. Someone else claimed to have it. The rancher realized the truth was no longer something he could control. It was being pulled apart by too many hands. Outside, clouds gathered again, dark and heavy. But thunder rolled faintly in the distance, echoing the unrest inside the hall. The woman felt a strange calm settle over her. Fear still lingered, but beneath it was a sense of inevitability. Whatever happened next would finally give shape to the questions that had haunted her. A sudden shout erupted near the door. A late arrival pushed inside, breathless, holding a small stack of papers. He claimed they had been found hidden among old county records. Gasps filled the room as the papers were passed forward. The rancher's heart pounded. He recognized the handwriting immediately. His past stood there in ink and paper, fragile and dangerous. The rider's expression faltered for the first time, confidence slipping. Before anyone could read the documents aloud, the storm broke. Thunder cracked sharply overhead, rattling the windows. Rain slammed against the roof, drowning out voices.
Ow.
In the confusion, tempers flared.
Ouch.
People stood, shouting over one another, each demanding to be heard. The rancher moved instinctively, stepping closer to the woman, shielding her from the chaos. She looked up at him, eyes wide but steady. In that moment, she realized how deeply their lives had become entangled. Whatever the outcome, there was no separating their stories now. The meeting teetered on the edge of collapse. Someone called for order. Someone else demanded the papers be read immediately. The writer argued they needed time to verify authenticity. Suspicion thick in the air. As the storm raged, the papers lay on the table, untouched, holding answers that could shift everything. The rancher stared at them, knowing once they were read, nothing would be the same. His past, her identity, the future of the ranch all balanced on those pages. A sudden crack of thunder shook the hall louder than before. The lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness. Gasps and shouts filled the space. When the lights steadied again, the crowd surged forward, drawn to the truth waiting in plain sight. The rancher reached for the papers at the same moment the writer did. Their hands brushed, tension electric. Around them voices rose, demanding resolution, justice, answers. The woman stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. She said the truth had waited long enough. Her words carried across the room, silencing the crowd just long enough to make space for what came next. Outside, the storm howled, rain beating against the walls as if urging the moment on. Inside, every breath felt suspended, the next heartbeat poised to break the silence. The truth stood ready to be spoken, and no one could stop it now.